Between 1843 and 1847, every spring brought another disappearance. At least 7 daughters from Mississippi's richest plantation families vanished without a trace. Their parents offered neat explanations, boarding schools in Europe, sudden marriages in Charleston. But not a single body was found, and no real investigation was ever made. Hidden deep in the Adams County archives, though, lies a leather-bound diary that tells a far darker version of events. It speaks of a cruel experiment disguised as treatment, one so vicious that 3 men risked their lives to stop it. This is the real story of what happened inside the old barn at the Kellerman estate, and why Catherine Kellerman's body was never recovered. Before we uncover what the Kellermans tried to erase from history, make sure you're subscribed and have the notifications on, because stories like this one were meant to be buried. And let me know in the comments what state you're listening from, so we can see just how far this story travels. The truth about Catherine Kellerman began with her mother's obsession and ended with a revelation that shook the foundation of Mississippi's elite. In 1843, Natchez stood as the pride of Southern wealth, a city built on cotton control and appearances. Families competed not just in land and yields, but in the beauty of their daughters and the purity of their bloodlines. Along the bluffs overlooking the river, grand white mansions gleamed, each one demanding constant labor from the hundreds enslaved beneath their roofs. The Kellerman estate stretched over nearly 4,000 acres of prime land. Lucinda Kellerman, who inherited it from her father, was one of the few women to own such power, and she wielded it with precision and cruelty. Her dinner parties were performances of perfection, her image carefully sculpted through corsets and vinegar water. Her breath always short, but her reputation flawless. Her daughter Catherine, 19 and heavyset, was everything Lucinda despised. Where her mother was sharp and angular, Catherine was soft, her body refusing to bend to Lucinda's ideals. To Lucinda, her daughter's size wasn't just unattractive. It was a personal betrayal, an embarrassment paraded before society. What she never admitted was that Catherine began to change only after her father's death in 1839. Officially, it was a heart attack. In truth, he died with an empty bottle of laudanum and a letter to Catherine, a letter Lucinda burned before anyone could read it. The Kellerman plantation ran like a machine under Lucinda's iron will. 237 enslaved people kept it running, among them 3 men who would one day play key roles in Catherine's fate. Joshua Fletcher, a blacksmith born on the plantation, was quiet but strong and observant. Samuel Hayes, bought in 1841, was literate, a rare and dangerous skill, and kept the plantation's records. And 16-year-old Daniel Cooper, newly purchased from Louisiana, carried scars both visible and invisible, his youth masking a haunted awareness. The old East barn, hidden behind a grove of live oaks, was no longer used for cotton storage. It was secluded, unseen, the perfect place for secrets. Lucinda's diary, later found hidden in a trunk, reveals the moment her plan took shape. On March 15, 1843, she wrote of seeing another plantation girl transformed from plump to thin through relentless labor. The body, she wrote, when pushed beyond its limits, consumes itself. It burns away the excess, revealing the form that God intended. The next day, she resolved that Catherine's transformation would begin. What she didn't write was that the other girl's miracle came at the cost of her health and sanity. Still, in Lucinda's eyes, that suffering was a small price for beauty. In Natchez society, silence was its own kind of law. Families looked the other way, never questioning what others did behind closed doors. To speak of it was to risk one's own secrets. Lucinda understood this game better than anyone she knew, which doctors to bribe, which ministers to flatter, and just how far cruelty could go before it became scandal. On March 16th, she called Joshua, Samuel, and Daniel into the parlor. Their presence among fine china, a clear violation of unspoken rules. "My daughter requires rehabilitation," she said smoothly. will oversee her work in the east barn from dawn until dusk. You will report to me daily, and you will speak of this to no one." The threat needed no elaboration. Disobedience meant the whip or worse. But behind her command was something colder, the thrill of anticipation, the excitement of a scientist about to test her theory. The next morning, Catherine was taken to the barn in silence, dressed in a plain work gown, her eyes dull with resignation. Her punishment began at once grinding corn by hand, hauling 50-pound sacks, splitting firewood until her hands bled. And as the days passed, the barn that once held cotton became something else entirely. A place where cruelty disguised itself as discipline and where the truth about Catherine Kellerman began to die. The labor Catherine endured was never meant to be productive. It was engineered to destroy her body slowly and completely. Every task was chosen to grind her down, not the grain. Each movement, each burden was designed to push her to the edge of collapse, while still appearing purposeful enough to satisfy any curiosity from outside eyes. Inside the barn, every sound echoed into infinity. The grinding of the millstone, the thud of heavy sacks, the ragged rhythm of Catherine's breathing, all merged into a haunting music of endurance. Even the old timbers seemed alive, their groans marking time like a cruel metronome. What struck Samuel most was her silence. Catherine never cried out or begged for rest. She spoke only when she absolutely had to, asking for water in a voice that barely carried. Her expression stayed blank, as if her mind had retreated somewhere distant, far from the pain of her body. Every afternoon at exactly 3 o'clock, Lucinda arrived. Her silk skirts whispered across the dirt floor as she circled her daughter like a merchant appraising livestock. In her hand was a leather journal, and each day she took her measurements as though conducting a scientific experiment. On March 20th, she noted coldly, weight estimated 195 pounds. Face remains bloated, arms reduced slightly, calluses forming unfortunate but necessary, temperament suitably subdued, progress as expected. Yet the journal revealed only the surface of what she was doing. Behind closed doors, Lucinda had begun corresponding with other women of her class, each with a daughter who had in their eyes failed them. Helena Cartwright's daughter had been caught reading abolitionist pamphlets. Beatrice Singleton's girl refused marriage and wanted to study medicine. Constance Whitfield's daughter had secretly taught enslaved children to read. They came to the Kellerman estate under polite pretenses, tea gardening consultations, party planning, but all left having seen the miracle in the barn. You see, Lucinda would tell them gesturing toward her exhausted child discipline reshapes the body as it does the soul. 3 weeks, and already the excess fades. Imagine 3 months. The women took notes, asked questions, and began their own treatments. By April, 3 more girls were locked away in barns across the county each, under watch of enslaved men ordered to carry out the same cruel regimen. Soon Daniel, sent on errands between estates, began to notice what was happening. Once busy barns were now off limits. Young women who once graced every social gathering had vanished. "There are others," he whispered to Samuel one evening. "Girls working like her, just as tired, just as scared." Samuel felt the chill of realization. It wasn't just one mother's madness. It was a spreading system of punishment disguised as refinement. Yet amid that cruelty, something unexpected began to shift inside the old barn. The work that was meant to break Catherine also freed her from her mother's constant gaze. There were no mirrors, no judgment, no whispers about her weight. Just the steady rhythm of labor and the quiet presence of the 3 men who, to her surprise, treated her with dignity. Joshua wordlessly shared her burdens when she faltered. Samuel cleaned and wrapped her bleeding hands. Daniel caught her when she stumbled and met her eyes, without shame or disgust. 6 weeks into her confinement, on a still April afternoon, Catherine finally spoke more than a few words. "Do you hate me?" she asked Joshua as he repaired a broken plow handle. He didn't look up. "No, miss. You should," she said. "I'm the daughter of your owner. I live in comfort while you suffer. I'd hate me." Joshua paused, his voice steady. "Hate takes energy, miss. Energy's better spent on surviving." That single sentence changed everything. Slowly, the silence between them filled with quiet exchanges. Small stories whispered dreams, truth spoken under the creak of the rafters. Catherine learned that Joshua had a wife and children he rarely saw, that Samuel could read and write, and once lived in a city where men spoke freely, and that Daniel, still a boy, dreamed of a freedom he could barely imagine. In turn, they learned that Catherine's world inside the mansion had been its own prison, every breath monitored, every gesture corrected, every meal a battlefield of shame. One morning in May, as sunlight spilled through the cracks in the barn walls, Catherine whispered, "She wants me gone." The daughter she imagined doesn't exist, and the one she has embarrasses her. "I think she hopes this will kill me, so she can tell the world I died of illness, and finally be proud." Samuel had suspected it for weeks, but hearing Catherine say it out loud froze him where he stood. Lucinda's visits had become rarer, yet each time she appeared, her disappointment grew sharper. The weight loss she had demanded was happening, yes, but Catherine wasn't withering away as planned. She was adapting. Her arms had grown strong from lifting grain, her breathing steadier, her posture more confident. The treatment was forging something Lucinda hadn't intended: resilience. By early June, her diary reflected the shift in her mind from frustration to something colder, more deliberate. June 3rd, 1843. Catherine persists in her corpulence despite rigorous labor. Results unsatisfactory. Consider reduced rations or extended work hours into the night. The Cartwright girl responds better. Why should mine be different? What Lucinda didn't know was that Joshua had been quietly defying her. He smuggled bits of food from his family's meager supplies, small portions just enough to keep Catherine alive. It was an act of rebellion wrapped in mercy. In her weary eyes, he saw a reflection of his own daughter's innocence, a soul punished simply for existing. Within the barn's shadowed walls, something began to shift. Catherine and Joshua started to talk, not just about the labor, but about the absurdity of their world. "Your mother would have me whipped for looking at you this long," Joshua said one humid afternoon as they moved a broken plow. "But here, when we're both sweating in the same dirt, what's the difference between us? We both bleed, we both tire, we both want to be free." For the first time, Catherine truly saw it, her captivity of privilege mirrored against his captivity of chains. She wasn't free either. She was just trapped in silk instead of iron. Late one afternoon in June, as she tried to lift a sack too heavy for her frame, Catherine's legs gave out. Joshua caught her, and for a heartbeat the world went still. They stood close, breathing the same dusty air, aware of the danger pressing in from all sides. "We shouldn't," she whispered. "No," he said softly. "We shouldn't." But neither stepped away. What followed in the days and nights after felt less like sin and more like survival, a rebellion carved out of stolen moments, hidden glances, and the shared truth that both were human in a world that denied it. Samuel and Daniel noticed, of course. They said nothing, only shifted their routines to give them space. "This ends badly," Samuel muttered one night. Daniel, young but far from naive, shrugged. "Maybe. But maybe they deserve a little peace before it does." While love blossomed in the shadows, Lucinda was consumed with ambition. Her rehabilitation method had become the newest obsession among Southern elites. She wrote letters to wealthy families across the South, detailing her successes and promising transformation through discipline and deprivation. July 12th, 1843. Interest in my methodology has exceeded expectation. Mrs. Rutherford of Mobile requests a detailed regimen. Mrs. Caldwell of Savannah seeks results for her unruly daughter. Perhaps a treatise, The Correction of Female Indolence, through measured labor, would serve society well. Her cruelty was evolving into commerce. But while Lucinda dreamed of prestige, Catherine's body betrayed the secret she could never allow her mother to discover. By August, the morning sickness had become impossible to ignore. At first, she blamed the poor rations. Then came the missed bleeding, and with it the truth she could no longer deny. One humid morning, while the others worked at the far end of the barn, she whispered to Joshua, "I'm with child. Yours." His face flickered from shock to fear, then to a quiet tenderness that made her chest ache. But beneath it all was dread. They both knew what it meant. "She'll kill you," Catherine said, "all of you, to keep this secret." Joshua took her hands, his voice low but steady. "Then we find a way out. Before she finds out." Samuel, with his quiet intelligence and access to Lucinda's office, began searching for answers and a weakness. Hidden among plantation ledgers and correspondence, he found something chilling. 4 names. 4 girls who had undergone Lucinda's treatment before Catherine. Each entry ended with a single vague word, resolved. "What time ye want?" "What does that mean?" Daniel whispered when Samuel showed him the ledger. Samuel's face hardened. "It means they didn't make it." The truth hit them all. Catherine was not a project. She was a test subject in a pattern of disappearances. Whether by starvation, exhaustion, or something far worse, the girls who failed Lucinda's cure simply vanished. And soon Catherine would be next. They needed money, papers, transport, things no enslaved person could obtain. Then Catherine spoke up, her voice shaking but certain. "My father's study. He kept money there, and papers. My mother locked it after his death, but I know where the key is." The plan that followed was desperate, but their only chance. Catherine would pretend to fall ill, giving her an excuse to return to the house. There she'd retrieve her father's hidden resources. With those, Joshua and the others could forge freedom papers and flee north. It would require perfect timing, distraction, and luck they didn't have, but there was no other choice. On August 17th, Catherine began her performance. She screamed in pain so convincingly that even Samuel felt a pang of panic. Lucinda, irritated but wary, ordered her taken to her room. "If she's pretending, she'll double her work tomorrow," she said coldly. "If not, Dr. Harrison will examine her in the morning." The mention of the doctor sent terror through Catherine like a knife. An examination would expose her pregnancy. She had one fragile day, to get into her father's study, find the money, and return before her mother discovered everything. That night, while the Kellerman estate glittered in candlelight and laughter echoed from a nearby dinner party, Catherine moved through the house like a ghost. She knew its rhythms as well as her own heartbeat. By 9, the servants would be in their quarters. By 10, her mother's maid would extinguish the lamps and retire. Then, the house would fall into its long, fragile silence. 7 hours, that was all the time she had. In her mother's room, the air was thick with the scent of lavender and powder. The music box sat on the dressing table just as she remembered. When she opened it, the delicate tune rang out loud and fragile like a confession whispered into the dark. Inside was the small iron key tied to a faded ribbon. The study door creaked as she turned the lock. The smell of old leather and tobacco hit her like a memory. For a moment she could almost see her father at his desk, the soft glow of lamplight on his face and the kindness in his eyes. That image broke her heart. Then she set to work. The money was exactly where he'd said it would be, $300 hidden beneath a false drawer bottom. But what she hadn't expected were the letters. Dozens of them written in her father's careful hand to a lawyer in Philadelphia, describing his plans to free every enslaved person on the plantation. Each letter burned with guilt and conviction. He had wanted to end the cycle of cruelty, and it had cost him everything. Then she found one addressed to her. My dearest daughter, if you are reading this, then I have failed to be brave in life and found courage only in death. He wrote of shame and cowardice, of a heart that could not carry the burden of the life he'd built. He begged for her forgiveness, not just for leaving her with her mother, but for the part he had played in the suffering of others. When Catherine finished reading, the tears blurred the ink. Her father had not died of heart failure. He had chosen death over hypocrisy. Her mother had burned the truth and buried his repentance with him. Then came the final discovery, a will unfiled, unsigned, by the courts but clear. He had left everything, the plantation, the land, the people, to Catherine, with instructions that everyone enslaved there was to be freed upon his death. Lucinda had hidden it, forged signatures, and continued her empire of cruelty as though it were her divine right. The paper trembled in Catherine's hands. It was more than inheritance. It was justice, if only they could survive long enough to use it. She hid the letters, the money, and the will inside the lining of a heavy winter coat, knowing Lucinda would never search it in the heat of August. By dawn, she was back in her bed, pretending to sleep as the house stirred. When Lucinda entered, cool and composed, Catherine forced a calm smile. "I'm ready to return to work," she said. Her mother's expression barely softened. "Dr. Harrison will visit tomorrow to ensure you are thriving," Lucinda said. "You will tell him the truth, that my method works. If you don't, you will regret it." The doctor's visit meant exposure. They had one day, maybe less. Back in the barn, Catherine revealed everything, the letters, the money, the will. The four of them understood instantly that there was no turning back. "We leave tonight," Joshua said. His voice carried quiet authority, steady despite the fear behind it. "All four of us. We take the money, the documents, and we run." "Run." Samuel shook his head. "They'll hunt us before sunrise. Every patrol in the county will be looking for escaped slaves and a missing white girl." Catherine's eyes were clear. "Then we won't be running," she said. "We'll be traveling. I'll be a widow with my servants, heading north to visit family in Kentucky. The money will buy the papers we need." It was madness, but it was also their only hope. The rest of the day passed in a haze of preparation. Samuel's task was the riskiest. He would go to Natchez under cover of darkness to find a forger named Crawford, a free man known to sell false travel documents for a price. He would take $50, enough to buy papers that could pass inspection, but not enough to ruin them if he was caught. Joshua gathered food, water, and what little protection they could manage, 2 knives stolen from the tool shed and hidden in the rafters. Daniel's role was the hardest. He would stay behind, keeping the illusion alive that Catherine was still in the barn. When Lucinda arrived in the morning, he'd claim Catherine had escaped during the night, threatening him to ensure his compliance. It was a lie that would likely cost him a whipping or worse. The boy accepted his fate with quiet courage. "They'll believe it," he said. "They'll believe a white woman scared me. Let them." As the sun dipped behind the oaks, Catherine wrote 3 letters. One to her father, telling him that she had found his will, his words, his courage. One to Daniel, promising she would return for him if she lived. And one to her mother, though she never planned to send it. In it, she wrote every truth Lucinda had refused to face, every cruelty, every humiliation, every choice that traded love for power. "Even if we fail," Catherine said as she sealed it, "I want her to know that I saw her for what she is. Not a mother, not even human. Just emptiness wearing silk." As night fell, Samuel slipped into the trees, heading toward Natchez. The others waited in the barn, the silence stretching thin and heavy. Every creak of the wood felt like a countdown. "If we're caught," Joshua said at last, "they'll kill me. And Samuel. And Daniel. But you, Catherine, you could live. Say we forced you. Say we made you help us." Catherine turned to him, eyes fierce. "No, I won't live that way. This is my choice, the first real one I've ever made. If we fail together." Joshua reached for her, then pulling her close. They stood in the darkness, holding on to each other, the sound of the crickets outside blending with the beating of their hearts. For the first time in their lives, both of them were free, not in body, but in will. And by morning the world would know what that freedom was worth. Daniel stood by the door, his eyes stinging with tears he didn't fully understand. What he saw between Catherine and Joshua wasn't something their world was built to allow. It was something rare and fragile love, blooming in a place where beauty wasn't supposed to survive. It felt like watching flowers open inside a burning house. Just before midnight, Samuel slipped back into the barn, his clothes dusted with river soot and his face set with quiet triumph. "Crawford sends his regards," he said, pulling a folded packet from inside his shirt. "Travel papers for Mrs. Catherine Kellerman, widow, and her 3 servants bound for Louisville, Kentucky. Cost me every cent, but he does good work." They spread the forged documents across the workbench, the candlelight flickering over Crawford's craftsmanship, stamped seals looping signatures, even creased edges to mimic official handling. According to the papers, Catherine was a young widow transporting her property, 3 enslaved men valued at $3,000 total north for sale to settle her late husband's debts. The irony was so sharp it hurt. The system that had imprisoned them would now be their disguise, their ticket to freedom. "We leave in 2 hours," Catherine decided. "We move between 2 and 4. The roads will be quiet. By dawn, we reach Natchez and book passage." No one argued. The air was thick with fear and hope. But as they prepared, Daniel's small voice broke the silence. "Miss Catherine," he said, hesitating, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I saw." His expression carried a kind of dread that aged him beyond his 16 years. "The other girls," he said softly, "the ones at the Cartwright, Singleton, and Whitfield places. I went to deliver grain last week. The barns, they were empty, scrubbed clean, like someone was trying to erase what happened." Catherine felt her stomach turn to ice. "Empty, gone," Daniel whispered. "I asked one of the field hands what happened to Miss Rebecca. He just looked at me with pity. The kind of look people give when they can't say the truth." The words hung heavy in the dark. It meant one thing. Those girls were dead. "How many?" Catherine asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Daniel said. "But I've seen at least 3 barns cleaned out, all after your mother visited." Catherine's breath caught. Her mother's treatment wasn't just cruelty, it was murder. "We can't just leave," she said, shaking. "We have to stop her. Expose this. Tell the world what she's done." Joshua's voice was low, steady, but heavy with grief. "If we try before we're safe, we'll die before anyone listens. We survive first. Then, we tell the truth." Catherine knew he was right, But it didn't make the choice easier. Leaving meant abandoning others still trapped in the same nightmare. The guilt carved deep into her chest. They gathered the forged papers, the money, the letters, and the small knives Joshua had hidden. Catherine tucked her father's will close to her body, wrapped in linen beneath her dress. She took her unsent letter to Lucinda too, a record of every cruelty, every crime, a testament to the monster her mother had become. Their farewell to Daniel was short, because anything longer would have broken them all. Catherine knelt and pulled him into an embrace. "I will come back for you," she whispered fiercely. "When it's safe, when I have power, I'll come back. You'll not be forgotten." Daniel could only nod. He watched through the barn doors as they disappeared into the night shadows, swallowed by the grove of oaks that had hidden so many sins. The walk to Natchez was longer than they'd hoped. 4 hours of darkness, stumbling through uneven ground, halting at every rustle and distant hoofbeat. The night was mercifully moonless, but that same darkness turned the path treacherous. Catherine's legs ached. Her lungs burned, but she kept going because stopping meant death. They reached the city just as the horizon began to pale. The world was waking. Dock workers shouted to one another. The smell of the river hung thick in the air. Catherine wiped the dirt from her face, straightened her dress, and summoned the posture she had learned from years of her mother's rigid etiquette. When they entered the steamboat office, the clerk behind the counter barely hid his curiosity. A finely dressed young widow, travel-worn, but still refined, flanked by 3 enslaved men. It was unusual, but not impossible. "Good morning, madam," he said politely. "How may I assist you?" Catherine laid the forged papers on the desk, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might give her away. "Passage to Louisville," she said evenly. "Earliest departure. My servants and I have traveled far, and I wish to continue without delay." The clerk examined the papers, flipping through them, with the practiced indifference of a man accustomed to bureaucracy. Behind her, Joshua, Samuel, and Daniel bowed their heads, every movement rehearsed. At last, the clerk nodded. "The Morning Star departs at 8, he said. "A private cabin for you, quarters for your property below deck." Catherine's jaw tightened at the word property, but she managed a calm reply. "That will do." She counted out the money. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Kellerman," the clerk said, handing her the tickets. "May your journey be peaceful." For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a breath of relief. They had done it. They were leaving Mississippi. But as they stepped onto the dock, Samuel's hand caught her arm. His voice was barely a whisper. "Miss Catherine, we're being watched." She followed his gaze to a man leaning against a warehouse wall. His clothes were plain, but his posture wasn't that of a laborer. He was studying them too closely. When he realized he'd been noticed, he turned and slipped away toward the main street. Slave catcher Joshua muttered. He saw something. They hurried toward the Morning Star's gangplank, but haste drew attention. Workers paused their conversations, fading as they passed. The captain, a broad-shouldered man with a lined, weathered face, looked up from his manifest as they approached. "Mrs. Kellerman," he said, glancing at the tickets. "You're traveling alone with 3 male servants." Catherine met his eyes. "My husband died of yellow fever in New Orleans. I'm traveling to family in Kentucky. These men are being transported for sale to settle his debts." The captain studied her for a moment, then gave a short nod. "Board quickly. We leave in an hour." They climbed aboard. Catherine turned once, looking back toward Natchez. Her blood ran cold. The man from the warehouse was back speaking to 2 others, one mounted on horseback. Moments later, the rider spurred his horse hard and galloped toward the road that led straight to the Kellerman estate. "They're going to her," Catherine whispered. "We have an hour before my mother finds out." Joshua's face hardened. "Then we pray this captain loves his schedule more than his conscience." They were shown to their quarters. Catherine's small cabin overlooked the river, while the men were sent toward the cargo hold. The mate escorting them seemed distracted, allowing them to linger near her door a few extra seconds, enough for Samuel to murmur, "Something's wrong. The crew's uneasy. They know something." Time dragged. Catherine stood at the port window, watching crates loaded passengers boarding, the sun climbing. Every minute was a battle between hope and dread. Then, at 7:30, movement on the dock froze her in place. Lucinda's carriage. Behind it, armed riders, the sheriff, plantation men with rifles. Her mother stepped out, regal and terrifying in black silk, her fury controlled but unmistakable. She strode toward the captain, speaking sharply, pointing at the ship. The captain shook his head, but Catherine could tell from his hesitation that he was not refusing her outright. Their hour of hope was vanishing fast. Lucinda's voice cut across the water as she called Catherine her daughter and the men's stolen property, and when the captain led her aboard, Catherine knew their hour of hope was over. The cabin door flew open to reveal Lucinda, with the sheriff's men behind her, and Joshua, Samuel, and Daniel held at gunpoint. Lucinda asked if Catherine truly believed she could escape, and for the first time, Catherine met her without fear. She said she had found her father's will and knew about the forged papers, the stolen estate, and the deaths hidden behind a so-called treatment. Lucinda called her father weak and admitted the regimen was sound. Even if some girls lacked the strength to survive a cold confession that made Catherine see she was facing not just cruelty, but a void where a conscience should be. Lucinda ordered Catherine home and the men to the gallows, adding that the stolen documents would burn and that Catherine would finish her treatment because she carried visible proof of her shame. She knew about the pregnancy, having sent the doctor to search Catherine's room. Joshua lunged, was smashed to his knees by a rifle, and Catherine offered herself if they would spare the men. Samuel stepped in with a bluff, claiming copies of every incriminating record had already been sent to northern lawyers and newspapers. And though Lucinda snapped that it was impossible, the doubt showed on her face. After a long pause, she told the sheriff to jail them all until she could sort the matter and find the supposed evidence. And as they were led off the boat, Catherine and Joshua traded a look that felt like goodbye. The county jail stank of damp stone. Catherine was locked alone upstairs while the men were taken below. That evening, Lucinda visited with the same cold calculation, promising confessions from the men. By morning, unmarked graves by next week, and Catherine's return to the barn until her condition conveniently resolved. Catherine told her someone would notice, and Lucinda asked who would dare. When the sheriff owed favors, the doctors took her money, and the other families were complicit. 3 silent days passed. On the 4th night, Daniel appeared at her barred window, bruised and shaking. He said Joshua had been taken 2 nights earlier and would not return, and that Samuel was still alive but broken by questioning. Then, the small hope. Samuel had actually sent a letter north weeks ago to an abolitionist contact in Pennsylvania, not a bundle of documents, but a detailed account of the barns and the missing girls. Maybe someone would come, Daniel said. But Catherine had to live long enough to be believed because she was the only witness the court could not dismiss out of hand. Survive by agreeing to everything he urged, pretend to be broken, and wait. That night, Catherine played the part. She cried, apologized, and promised obedience, and Lucinda, satisfied, moved her back to the mansion and locked her in a room where the doctor could attend to her discreetly. Weeks blurred into a quiet terror. The pregnancy advanced on meager food and constant fear. The doctor examined her with chilly efficiency and never mentioned ending it, but Catherine understood the plan. She would carry to term the child would disappear, and she would be declared a tragic mother to a stillborn. So the Kellerman name could stay spotless, while the truth drowned in silence. By late October, the air inside the Kellerman mansion shifted. Dr. Harrison arrived with a nervous urgency Catherine had never seen in him, and downstairs she caught fragments of raised voices. Her mother's sharp, brittle tone edged not with authority this time, but panic. The next morning, without explanation, Catherine was bundled into a carriage bound for Natchez. The pace was frantic, the wheels striking the road as if chased by something unseen. At the courthouse, she was led into a high-ceilinged chamber where two men in formal northern dress waited. They introduced themselves as investigators from the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society acting on information received in a letter from Mississippi. Mrs. Kellerman has been most cooperative, one said, though the look he gave Lucinda made it clear he doubted that entirely. But we need corroboration. You are Catherine Kellerman, correct? Catherine glanced at her mother, sitting rigid with fury, then back at the men. I am, she said, and I have much to tell you. For hours she told everything: the barn, the forced labor disguised as treatment, the vanished girls, her father's hidden will, the forged documents, the murders buried beneath polished reputations. The investigators took notes until their hands cramped. When she described her pregnancy and Joshua's execution, one of them went still. The man was killed without trial, he asked. By my mother's order, Catherine said. The sheriff obeyed. His body was never returned. Lucinda's lawyer whispered frantically, but the tide had turned. Samuel, gaunt and barely able to stand, was brought in to testify. Daniel confirmed each detail. Within weeks, Mississippi's grand façade of civility began to crack. The trial that followed in early 1844 transfixed the South. Lucinda Kellerman was charged with multiple murders, forgery, and theft. Several other plantation families were implicated. Some fled, others destroyed evidence or claimed ignorance. Lucinda was convicted that January and sentenced to life in prison. 2 years later, she died behind stone walls, buried in an unmarked grave, her name erased from the society columns she once ruled. Catherine gave birth in February 1844 to a son she named Thomas Joshua, honoring both her father and the man who had taught her what courage meant. With her father's legitimate will finally recognized, she inherited the plantation and began the formal process of manumission, freeing every enslaved person who had survived the Kellerman estate. Samuel lived working beside her as a paid steward. Daniel stayed as well, pursuing the education long denied him. Together they remade the land into something unheard of in Mississippi, a plantation run without slavery, guided by dignity instead of fear. When spring came, Catherine ordered the old barn demolished. Beneath its rotted beams, the workers uncovered shallow graves, 7 sets of bones. 7 girls erased by Lucinda's treatment. Catherine saw that each was named buried properly and remembered Rebecca Cartwright, Emma Singleton, Sarah Whitfield, Abigail Henderson, Margaret Ashworth, Virginia Thorne, and Ellen Pruitt. This story reminds us that the worst horrors are not born of superstition, but of ordinary cruelty disguised as virtue. The hunger for control, the worship of appearance, the silence that lets evil pass as refinement. What do you think? Was every secret truly uncovered, or did some die with Lucinda Kellerman? If this tale unsettled you, share it with someone who loves dark history. Subscribe for more stories like it, and remember, the past still whispers beneath the ground, waiting to be heard.